The cold rain poured relentlessly, drenching everything in its path. In the heart of the city, a man lay in a sterile hospital bed, his breath shallow, his eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. James Weston, a self-made millionaire, had everything. Most people would dream of wealth, success, power, but nothing that could fill the gaping hole in his heart. His wealth had never been able to give him the one thing he longed for, a family. And now, with days left to live, his heart carried a burden greater than any business deal or luxury possession. The thought of dying alone, with no one to carry on his legacy, haunted him relentlessly. It wasn't just the money that troubled him, it was the lives of the forgotten children who roamed the streets of the city, unseen, unloved. James had spent his life building an empire, yet he'd never truly found peace. His mind raced as his life flashed before him. His parents, gone. His friends, few. The world, indifferent. But then, in his last moments, a sudden clarity struck him like a bolt of lightning. What if he could do something? Something that would not only bring meaning to his life, but could change the lives of others forever? What if he could offer these homeless boys, these innocent souls who had never known love, a future, a chance to have a family? His mind was made up. As the doctors quietly whispered around him, James made his final wish. "I want to adopt them, all 5 of them." The nurses exchanged puzzled glances. Adopting 5 children? It sounded absurd, but James was no longer a man bound by the rules of society or logic. He had no time to waste. The decision was clear, the urgency pressing on his chest like a weight that threatened to crush him. In those final moments, he made arrangements with a lawyer, a social worker, anyone who could help him fulfill this wish. These 5 boys, orphans from the streets, had no families, no homes. They had nothing. And James, in his most vulnerable state, was about to give them everything. But what seemed like an act of kindness, a final redemption, would quickly spiral into something far greater than James could ever imagine. The day after his passing, when the boys arrived at the mansion to claim their new lives, the unimaginable happened. The world would never be the same again. What they had expected was nothing short of ordinary. What they got, however, was nothing short of miraculous. Would they survive the chaos and unspoken secrets that came with their new life? Could they adapt to a world that had long rejected them? And most importantly, would James's final wish truly bring them the love and family he had hoped for? Their journey had just begun, and it would be nothing less than extraordinary. As the boys stepped into the grand mansion, their eyes widened in disbelief. It was hard to imagine that just hours ago they had been abandoned, huddled together in the cold alleyways, surviving on scraps of food, their lives determined by the hour. Now, standing in the warmth of a place that felt like something out of a dream, they were unsure whether they should feel joy or fear. Their faces, once hardened by years of neglect, began to soften with a sense of innocence they hadn't known in years. They had learned to rely on no one, but here, for the first time in their lives, they felt the heavy weight of a promise that someone cared. The oldest of the boys, Jacob, stood in the center of the room, his heart pounding. At 15, he had lived through the worst that life had to offer. He had seen his parents die from overdose, watched as his younger siblings were placed into different foster homes, and lived through countless nights of hunger, fear, and uncertainty. Yet, as he looked around, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Could it be? Could this truly be a new beginning? Behind him, his 4 younger brothers, Liam, Noah, Elijah, and Caleb, stood in a line, each of them varying in age but united in their silent suffering. Each boy had a story of loss and despair that no child should ever have to carry. Liam, just 8 years old, had never known a life without chaos. His tiny hands clutched the sleeve of his older brother as if holding on to the last shred of something familiar. Noah, at 10, often woke up in the middle of the night, crying out for his mother, whose face he could barely remember. Elijah, barely 6, was the quietest of them all. His large brown eyes filled with confusion as he tried to understand why they were suddenly here, in this mansion, surrounded by people who claimed to care for them. Caleb, the youngest at just 4, had no concept of the world beyond the streets. His innocence, though, was still intact, a bright light in a world that had been far too dark for far too long. They were all lost children, but they were about to discover something they had never known: safety. For the first time in their lives, they didn't have to watch their backs, didn't have to fight for the next meal, or endure the heartache of being abandoned. They didn't know it yet, but this would be their turning point. The mansion was more than just a house. It was their chance for redemption, their chance to live as children, not as survivors. They were about to experience what it meant to belong, what it meant to be loved. As the caretaker showed them to their new rooms, the boys were tentative, unsure of how to react to the plush beds, the warm lighting, and the endless shelves of books and toys that filled the space. Their hands trembled as they touched the soft sheets, their small fingers tracing the patterns as if they couldn't quite believe it was real. This was all so new, too new to understand. The innocence they still carried was fragile, a delicate thread holding them together. But beneath their confusion, there was a glimmer of something powerful: trust. A trust that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. Maybe this time they wouldn't be thrown away. The tears that had long been locked inside them started to fall. But these were not tears of sorrow. These were tears of release, of a broken spirit finally starting to heal. And yet, as they wiped their tears and looked at one another with cautious optimism, they all knew this moment, this opportunity, was fragile. The love they had longed for felt foreign, and they were scared to believe it could truly exist. For children who had never experienced kindness, every small gesture of love seemed too good to be true. What would happen when they were expected to trust completely? What would happen when they were asked to believe that someone could love them without expecting anything in return? As the days turned into weeks, the boys slowly began to adjust to their new lives. The mansion, once a daunting and unfamiliar place, started to feel more like home. The warmth of their new father figure, James Weston's memory, still hung in the air, a quiet presence that reminded them that their lives were about to be transformed. But for the boys, this transformation was more than just a change of address. It was the beginning of a moral awakening, one that would challenge their deeply rooted beliefs and shape their futures. Jacob, the oldest, struggled the most. At 15, he had learned to trust no one. The streets had taught him the harsh realities of survival, where kindness was often a trap and promises were broken as easily as they were made. His brothers, though younger, had witnessed the same things. They had learned to be wary, to fend for themselves, and to never expect anything from anyone, least of all from a millionaire who had no real connection to them. In their minds, kindness had always been a fleeting thing, something that could easily vanish when the next hardship arrived. But as the weeks passed, Jacob began to notice something different. The caretaker, a kind-hearted woman named Mrs. Adams, made sure they had everything they needed. Meals, clothes, school supplies, and most importantly, her time. She never rushed them, never made them feel like a burden. At first, Jacob was suspicious. Why was she so kind? What did she want from them? It was a question that gnawed at him, a question that kept him from fully embracing the love and stability she offered. One evening, as the boys sat around the dinner table, Jacob overheard a conversation that would change everything. Mrs. Adams was speaking to a social worker, telling them that she had been asked to oversee the boys' transition into their new life. "They're still so broken," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I believe they can heal. They just need someone to show them that they matter, that they're worthy of love." The word struck Jacob like a bolt of lightning. Worthy of love? For so long, he had believed the opposite. He had believed that his family, his brothers, were destined to struggle. They were discarded by society, left to fend for themselves. They weren't worthy of anything good. But now, as he listened to Mrs. Adams, he felt something stirring deep within him. Could it be possible? Could they actually be worthy of love and care? Could they have a future beyond their past? The next day, Jacob took a risk. He went to Mrs. Adams, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why, but he felt the need to speak the truth, to finally acknowledge the pain and mistrust that had been holding him back. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Why are you helping us? We're just kids from the street. We don't deserve this." Mrs. Adams looked at him with a warmth that made his heart ache. "Jacob," she said gently, "you and your brothers have been through more than any child should ever have to endure. But that doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. Everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves to feel safe, to feel cared for. No one is beyond redemption." Those words hit Jacob harder than anything he had ever heard. No one is beyond redemption. It was a concept so foreign to him, yet it resonated deep within his soul. His entire life, he had believed that people were defined by their pasts, that their actions, their mistakes, their suffering, all dictated their future. But Mrs. Adams was showing him that wasn't true. That despite everything they had been through, despite the scars they carried, they could still find peace, healing, and a future filled with love. As the days passed, Jacob began to open up to the idea that perhaps they weren't destined to be trapped by their past. He started to see his brothers differently, not as lost causes or broken souls, but as children with a future. He encouraged Liam to try his best in school, even though the boy struggled with his lessons. He told Noah that it was okay to cry, that it wasn't a weakness to feel emotions. He took Elijah to the park to play, teaching him how to ride a bike. And Caleb was the easiest. He was still so young, so full of wonder, and every day, Jacob saw the innocence in his eyes grow brighter, a reflection of the hope he was beginning to feel himself. But it wasn't just about the boy's healing. It was about Jacob's transformation. His belief in his own worth began to change. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was someone deserving of love, someone who could give love in return. He had been given a second chance, not just for his brothers, but for himself. The mansion was no longer a place of uncertainty. It was a home. And James Weston, even though he was no longer there, had given them all the most priceless gift of all, the belief that they could rebuild their lives. Jacob's moral awakening was not a single moment, but a gradual realization that life was not about what had happened to them, but about what they chose to do with the future. It was about the choices they made now, the relationships they formed, and the love they allowed themselves to receive. The boys had suffered, yes. They had been abandoned and forgotten, but they were no longer defined by that. They had a new family now, a family that believed in them, that cared for them, and that wanted to see them flourish. And as Jacob stood in the doorway, looking at his brothers as they played in the yard, he finally understood what Mrs. Adams meant. He wasn't just saving them. They were saving each other. Together, they would heal, grow, and thrive. Together, they would prove that no matter how broken a soul might be, redemption was always within reach. It was a quiet evening, the kind where everything seemed to stand still, as if the world was holding its breath. Jacob sat by the window, staring out into the vast expanse of the yard. His brothers were in the living room, playing with the toys Mrs. Adams had bought for them. The laughter echoed through the house, but something in Jacob's chest felt heavy. His mind kept drifting back to the days when they had been on the streets, when they had been invisible, when they had fought just to survive another day. Suddenly, he heard a soft knock on the door, followed by the sound of footsteps entering the room. Mrs. Adams, her eyes kind but knowing, sat down next to him. She didn't speak at first, just sat in silence, waiting for him to open up. Jacob turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know how to feel anymore," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to believe this is real. But every time I get close, I feel like I'm going to lose it all again." His eyes welled up, and for the first time, he didn't try to hide it. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty that had built up inside him for so long started to pour out. Mrs. Adams placed a hand on his shoulder, offering the comfort that had always been there, but that he had been too scared to accept. "Jacob," she said softly, "it's okay to feel scared, but you're not alone anymore. You and your brothers are finally home. You've made it through the worst, and now you get to build your future." Her words were simple, yet they struck something deep within him. Home. It had been so long since he'd known what that word meant. A place of safety. A place where love wasn't conditional. A place where no one would just leave. The realization that they had finally found that place, that they didn't have to fight anymore, was overwhelming. But what hit him the hardest was when he looked up at Mrs. Adams. Her eyes filled with understanding and compassion. She wasn't just a caretaker to him. She had become something more. She had become the mother figure they had never had, the one who believed in them when they had stopped believing in themselves. She had seen the potential in them, even when they couldn't see it. "Mrs. Adams," Jacob's voice broke, thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to say that. I've never felt this before. I've never felt like I actually deserve to be loved." Mrs. Adams pulled him into a gentle hug, her arms wrapping around him like a shield, a promise that she would never let him go. "You deserve it, Jacob. You deserve every bit of love and happiness that's coming your way. You and your brothers all deserve it." It was in that moment, as he held on to her, that the walls around Jacob's heart began to crumble. The years of fear, of abandonment, of believing he wasn't worthy of anything good, started to fade away. He wasn't just some lost kid anymore. He was part of something. He was loved. He was safe. And as he pulled back from the hug, wiping the tears that had fallen freely now, he saw his brothers through the doorway, their faces bright with happiness, their lives beginning to take shape in ways he never thought possible. The youngest, Caleb, looked up at Jacob with wide, trusting eyes. The smile on his face was pure, untainted by the harshness of the world. It was the kind of smile that reminded Jacob of the innocence he thought he had lost. He could see the same innocence in his brothers, the hope in their hearts that hadn't been destroyed, the dreams they still had of a better life. And in that moment, Jacob knew he had to protect that. He had to protect them. "Come on, big brother," Liam called out, his face lit up with excitement. "We're playing soccer. You have to join us." Jacob couldn't help but laugh, the sound coming from deep within him, a laughter he hadn't heard in years. He stood up, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. As he walked toward the living room, he could see the change in his brothers, too. They were no longer just surviving. They were living. They were starting to feel joy again. And as Jacob kicked the soccer ball with Liam, hearing Noah's playful taunts and Caleb's giggles in the background, he realized something profound. He wasn't just saving his brothers anymore. They were all saving each other. They were giving each other the chance to heal, to experience what it meant to be a family. And that, more than anything, was what made this moment so emotional. This was the beginning of their new life. Together. And though the road ahead would still have its challenges, Jacob knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, they would face it together. Because now, for the first time in a long time, they were a family. And nothing could take that away. The air was thick with a sense of uncertainty, yet it was calm, almost too calm. In the weeks following their arrival at the mansion, Jacob couldn't help but notice the changes in his brothers. They were adjusting slowly but surely, but there was something in the way they carried themselves that made him uneasy. They were starting to feel the weight of what had happened to them, the trauma of their past, the uncertainty of their future, and no one talked about it. It was an unspoken burden they all shared, a silent sacrifice that hung over them like a shadow. Jacob had seen it in their eyes, the way they still flinched when someone raised their voice, the way they slept with one eye open, as if the world could flip upside down at any moment. But the one who seemed to carry the most weight was Liam, the second oldest. At 12, he had always been the quiet one, the one who looked out for the others, in ways that were almost invisible. He wasn't the loud protector like Jacob, but he was always there, a silent guardian. It was clear to Jacob that Liam, despite his quiet nature, was shouldering a burden no child should ever have to bear. One night after dinner, Jacob found Liam alone in the garden, sitting on the steps that led to the back of the house. The moonlight cast long shadows across his face, and the sight of his brother so lost in thought made Jacob's heart tighten. Liam was usually the first to crack a joke, to lighten the mood, but tonight, he was still, silent, heavy. Without a word, Jacob sat down beside him. They sat in silence for a while, neither of them speaking, but the weight of unspoken understanding hung between them. It was in the stillness that Jacob realized what had changed. Liam wasn't just struggling to adapt to his new life. He was hiding something. Jacob could see it in the way he avoided eye contact, the way he never fully allowed himself to relax. There was a burden Liam was carrying, one that he was unwilling to share. Finally, Jacob spoke, his voice soft but firm. "Liam, what's going on? You've been different lately." Liam shifted uncomfortably, his fingers nervously twisting the hem of his shirt. He didn't meet Jacob's eyes. "I'm fine," he muttered, but the lie was evident, and Jacob wasn't buying it. He reached over, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder, urging him to speak. "You don't have to carry everything alone, you know," Jacob said gently, his voice laced with an understanding that came from his own struggles. "We're in this together." Liam finally looked up, his eyes wide and filled with something Jacob had never seen before: fear, shame, and a quiet kind of sadness. "I don't want you to think I'm weak," Liam whispered. I don't want you to think that I can't handle it, that I can't be strong like you." Jacob's heart ached as he listened to the words his younger brother had been holding back. Liam was the quiet one, but he had always been the glue that held them together in subtle ways. taking care of Caleb when Jacob couldn't, watching over Noah when he needed a friend. And now, in the midst of all the changes, he was carrying the guilt of feeling like he wasn't strong enough to live up to what was expected of him. "Liam," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to be strong like me. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. We're a family now. We share the weight." Liam's eyes shimmered, but he quickly looked away, biting his lip as if to keep the tears at bay. There was a painful silence between them before Liam spoke again, his voice barely audible. "I feel like I'm taking something away from you. You've worked so hard to keep us together, and now you're trying so hard to give us a better life. But I don't know if I can be what you want me to be. I don't want to let you down." Jacob's heart shattered for his brother. He realized that in Liam's quiet way, he had been sacrificing so much of himself, trying to protect Jacob, trying to live up to an ideal that was too much for a 12-year-old boy to carry alone. He wasn't just adjusting to their new life. He was silently suffering, trying to be the rock when he didn't have the strength to be one. Jacob pulled Liam into a hug, holding him tightly. "You're not letting me down, Liam. You're not taking anything away from me. We're in this together, all of us. You're enough, just as you are." For a moment, Liam didn't respond. He just sat there in his older brother's arms, letting the words sink in, the weight of his silent sacrifice beginning to lift just a little. In that moment, Jacob realized that the true strength didn't come from the ability to carry burdens alone. It came from sharing them, from allowing others in, and from knowing that no matter how heavy the load, they didn't have to carry it by themselves anymore. And as they sat together in the quiet garden, under the moonlight that bathed the world in peace, Jacob understood something profound. The sacrifice that had defined their lives, the silent, invisible weight they had all been carrying, was no longer theirs to bear alone. In this new life, they would carry each other's burdens, share each other's pain, and heal together, just as a family should. For the first time in a long time, Jacob felt the quiet comfort of knowing that no matter how much they had suffered, they had each other. And that was enough. The days following their arrival at Mrs. Adams's mansion had been a whirlwind of changes, but Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. The mansion was beautiful, filled with all the luxuries a child could dream of. But despite the comfort it offered, Jacob couldn't forget the world they had come from. The harsh streets, the cold nights, and the fear that had lingered in their hearts for so long. He couldn't let himself relax. Not yet. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Jacob sat on the balcony, watching his brothers play in the yard. His mind was consumed by worries. His brothers' well-being, their future, the weight of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. He was the oldest now, and even though Mrs. Adams had taken them in, even though they were safe in a beautiful home, Jacob knew that it was up to him to protect them, no matter what. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling from behind him. Mrs. Adams stepped onto the balcony, her warm smile offering a sense of comfort that Jacob hadn't realized he needed. She leaned against the railing beside him, her eyes glancing out at the boys in the yard. "You're doing a good job, Jacob," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. "I see how hard you're trying, and I can tell how much you care about your brothers." Jacob didn't respond. Right away, he kept his gaze on his brothers, noticing how Caleb was climbing a tree while Noah and Liam were playing catch. They were laughing, their carefree joy evident in the way they interacted with each other. For a moment, Jacob allowed himself to smile. But then the weight of responsibility came crashing back. "I can't help it," he said, his voice low. I feel like it's my job to make sure they never have to go through what we went through. I can't protect them from everything, but I have to try. I can't let anyone hurt them again, not now that they've finally found a place where they can be safe." Mrs. Adams studied him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch both comforting and grounding. "You can't protect them from everything, Jacob, and you don't have to. What matters is that they know you're here for them, that you'll always be there, no matter what." But Jacob wasn't convinced. His heart was heavy with the need to protect them, to ensure that nothing could ever hurt them again. He thought of the days when they had to fend for themselves, when they had to hide in alleyways, when the threat of danger had been constant. He had promised himself that he would never let that happen to them again. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jacob said, his voice hardening with determination. "I'm not going to let them fall back into that life. Not while I'm here. I'm going to make sure they grow up safe, that they grow up with everything they deserve." Mrs. Adams nodded, her gaze softening as she took in Jacob's words. She had seen the weight of responsibility in his eyes from the very first day they arrived. She knew that Jacob, despite being just a teenager, was already carrying the burden of being their protector, their leader. But she also knew that it wasn't a burden he had to carry alone. "Jacob," she said gently, "I'm here too. You don't have to do this alone. You have all of us now, and you don't have to fight every battle by yourself. Let me help you. Let the boys help you. You're a family now, and family sticks together." Her words hit him hard. Jacob had always been the protector, the one who made sure his brothers were okay, the one who took the brunt of the responsibility. But he had never truly allowed himself to lean on anyone. He had built walls around himself, convincing himself that if he didn't do it all, if he didn't carry every burden alone, he would fail them. He had to be strong for them. He had to be the one who never faltered. But as he looked at Mrs. Adams, her kindness and understanding evident in her eyes, he realized something important. He wasn't alone. They weren't alone. For the first time, the walls around his heart began to crack. Maybe, just maybe, it was okay to accept help. Maybe he didn't have to protect them all by himself. "I'm sorry," Jacob whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I've been trying so hard to hold everything together, but I guess I forgot that I don't have to do it all on my own." Mrs. Adams smiled softly, her hand squeezing his shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. "You don't have to. We're here for you, Jacob. All of us." Jacob looked out at his brothers again, their laughter filling the air, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel a sense of relief. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the dangers of their past still lingered in the shadows. But Jacob knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore, and that knowledge gave him the strength he needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Jacob's journey into redemption wasn't instantaneous, and it didn't come without struggle. In the weeks that followed their arrival at Mrs. Adams's mansion, he was confronted with emotions he wasn't sure how to handle. There were times when he lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, questioning if he was doing enough for his brothers, if he was doing enough for himself. Every decision he made felt like it carried the weight of the world, and the lingering doubt never left him. One afternoon, as he walked down the path toward the garden, he saw Caleb sitting on the grass, alone, his eyes downcast. Normally, Caleb would be outside, running around with the other boys, laughing, carefree, but today he looked different. Jacob's heart sank as he sat down beside him. "Hey, Caleb," Jacob said softly, his voice uncertain. "You okay?" Caleb didn't look up. His small hands were clasped together, his fingers playing with the grass beneath him. "I miss it, Jacob." I miss the streets." The words hit Jacob like a punch in the gut. He had known the boys carried scars from their past, but hearing Caleb speak about it so openly made the guilt inside Jacob flare up even more. He had promised himself that they would never go back to that life, that he would protect them from the pain they had experienced. And yet, despite the mansion, the food, the comfort, there was a part of Caleb that still longed for the life they had left behind. "I know," Jacob whispered, fighting back tears. "I miss it too, but that's not our life anymore. We don't have to live like that anymore." Caleb's eyes met Jacob's, and the sadness in them was almost too much to bear, but it was all we knew, and it wasn't so bad. "I just don't know how to live like this. Here. Everything is so different." Jacob swallowed hard, his chest tightening with emotion. He thought of all the times he had promised to be strong for them, all the times he had tried to keep it together, to act like he had everything under control. But here, with Caleb, he saw the cracks in his armor. He saw how much they were still hurting, how much they missed the life that had once been their only reality. "I've been trying so hard to fix everything," Jacob admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "But I think I've been doing it all wrong. I thought that if I kept us safe, if I kept us hidden from the world, we'd be okay. But I see now that I can't fix everything. I can't take away the pain, Caleb. I can't erase our past." Caleb looked at him, his eyes wide as though he hadn't expected Jacob to say that. "But you've been trying. You've been doing everything for us." "I know," Jacob replied, his throat tight. "But I've been so focused on protecting you guys from everything that I forgot one important thing. I forgot that we all have to heal in our own time. I can't force you to forget our past, and I can't carry that weight on my own." A long silence passed between them, the weight of Jacob's words settling in the air. He hadn't realized how much he had been pushing himself to be perfect, to be the one who made everything right. He had ignored his own need for healing, and in doing so, had unknowingly neglected his brother's need for it too. They all needed time to heal, to let go of the past and find their own way forward. But Jacob had been so focused on redemption for them that he had forgotten he needed it for himself too. "I'm sorry, Caleb," Jacob finally said, his voice shaking. "I've been so caught up in trying to protect you, I didn't see that I was hurting us in the process. I'm not perfect. I'm still figuring it out. But I'll do better. We'll do it together. You don't have to pretend that everything's okay. You don't have to bury your past. We'll face it together." Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. Then he slowly nodded, a small, tentative smile forming on his face. "Thanks, Jacob. I think I understand." Jacob felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had finally let go of some of the burden he had been carrying. There was still so much to heal, so much to make right, but Jacob knew now that redemption wasn't about doing it alone. It was about facing the past together, as a family, and moving forward, one step at a time. Over the next few days, Jacob took small steps toward healing. He apologized to each of his brothers for the times he had been too focused on being their protector to see their needs. He admitted his mistakes, the moments where he had pushed too hard, trying to erase their pasts, trying to control everything. And in turn, his brothers opened up to him, sharing their own fears, their own struggles with the new life they had found themselves in. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain of their pasts threatened to consume them, days when they relapsed into old habits, when the scars from their former lives resurfaced. But slowly, Jacob began to realize that redemption didn't mean erasing the past. It didn't mean pretending it never happened. It meant accepting it, acknowledging the pain, and choosing to move forward in spite of it. One evening, as Jacob watched his brothers play together in the yard, laughing and enjoying the life they had now, he finally allowed himself to smile. It was a small moment, a simple one, but it was enough. He had come to understand that redemption wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying, failing, and trying again. It was about embracing the imperfections, the struggles, and the messiness of life. And as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came their way. Jacob stood at the edge of the garden, watching his brothers run through the field, their laughter filling the air. The mansion behind them, once a symbol of his guilt and failure, now felt like a home. But even with the joy surrounding him, Jacob couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. There was something he hadn't shared with the boys yet, something that weighed heavier than any burden he had carried before. For weeks, Jacob had kept it hidden, convincing himself that if he didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't be true. But deep down, he knew that the moment of truth was coming. His health had been deteriorating, slowly but surely, the stress of the past months taking its toll on him. He had been getting sick more often, his body growing weaker, and yet he pushed through it, always putting the needs of the boys ahead of his own. It was the final test, the last trial. Could he keep it together long enough to see them through? To safety? To success? Or would his own limitations betray him at the worst possible time? The answer came in a moment he never expected. One night, as he was reviewing some papers in his study, a sharp pain shot through his chest. It was sudden, searing, and he collapsed, his vision blurring. Panic surged in his veins as he tried to reach for his phone, but the room spun. He was alone. The silence in the mansion felt suffocating. For the first time in a long while, he realized how fragile he truly was. In the panic, he somehow managed to dial Caleb's number, gasping for air as his chest tightened. Caleb's voice answered, and Jacob's words barely formed. "Caleb, need you." Jacob's breath came in ragged gasps. The next few moments felt like an eternity. Caleb arrived minutes later, but it felt like hours to Jacob. His chest continued to ache, his body growing colder by the second. He tried to speak, to reassure his brother, but the words wouldn't come. His mind raced through all the things he had yet to do, all the things he still needed to fix. And in that moment, a thought struck him with stunning clarity. What if I'm not here to see it through? Just as he began to slip into unconsciousness, Caleb was there, his face pale with fear. He was holding Jacob's hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Stay with me, Jacob. Stay with me." But Jacob couldn't answer. The pain was overwhelming, and his body felt like it was shutting down. His mind drifted, consumed by the uncertainty of what was happening. Was this the end? Had all of his efforts, all of his sacrifices been for nothing? Would the boys be left to fend for themselves once again? Then, out of nowhere, there was a shift. As if a switch had been flipped in the depths of his soul, Jacob felt a sudden surge of energy. He wasn't ready to go yet. Not like this. Not after everything they had been through. He thought of his brothers, their faces filled with trust, with hope. He thought of the boys who had lost everything, and yet still had hope because of him. And in that moment, something deep inside him ignited. It wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. Caleb's voice broke through the fog in his mind. "Jacob, hold on. You're gonna be okay." A sense of clarity washed over Jacob. The fear that had once consumed him, the doubt that had haunted him for weeks, began to fade away. He wasn't done. He hadn't finished what he started. He had a purpose: to raise these boys, to give them a future. And as long as he had breath in his body, he wasn't going to stop fighting for that future. Jacob focused on the sound of Caleb's voice, the only thing that seemed real at that moment. And as if to answer, his body finally responded. His breath steadied. His vision cleared. He was still alive. The next few days were a blur of tests, doctors, and recovery. Jacob was put on strict bed rest, his body needing time to heal. But even as he lay there, weak and vulnerable, he found a sense of peace. The thing that had once felt like a crushing weight, his responsibility for these boys, was no longer just a burden. It was a blessing. It was a second chance. Jacob realized something vital in those moments. He had always believed that to be strong, to be a leader, he had to carry the world on his shoulders. But in that instant, he learned the true meaning of strength. It wasn't about carrying the weight alone. It was about knowing when to ask for help, knowing when to trust others, and knowing that the fight for redemption wasn't one he had to win alone. And as Jacob slowly recovered, he found himself filled with an even greater sense of purpose. He had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to build something lasting for these boys. He was more determined than ever to see them thrive, to see them grow beyond the pain of their past. He had a chance to guide them, to teach them the lessons he had learned the hard way. That redemption was not just about fixing the past. It was about forging a better future together. One night, as the stars twinkled above the mansion, Jacob stood in the garden with Caleb, his heart swelling with pride. The boys were asleep, but their laughter still echoed in the distance, a reminder of how far they had come. "We're gonna be okay, Caleb," Jacob said, his voice steady and confident. Caleb looked up at him, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "I know, Jacob, I know." And for the first time, Jacob truly believed it. He had faced the greatest fear of his life and had come out the other side stronger than ever. There was still much to do, many challenges ahead. But in that moment, Jacob knew that as long as he had his family, they would face it all together. They had already proven that the impossible was possible. Jacob stood in the middle of the living room, the weight of everything he had been through finally sinking in. The mansion, now filled with laughter and light, stood as a symbol of everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed. He looked around at the faces of his brothers, the boys who had become his family, and realized something powerful. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He knew they would be okay. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow through the windows. The boys were gathered around the dining table, sharing stories and teasing each other. For Jacob, this simple moment was a dream come true. These kids, once abandoned and forgotten, had found a home, a place where they were loved and valued. And now they had a future he had promised to give them, no matter what. Jacob's heart swelled as he watched Caleb talking to little Timmy, making him laugh with a goofy face. There was so much joy in the room, so much love, that it almost felt surreal. It wasn't just about the money or the mansion anymore, it was about the bond they had built together. They were a family now, bound not by blood, but by shared experiences, struggles, and triumphs. Jacob's thoughts turned to the moment that had changed everything. The day he had decided to take in the 5 homeless boys, to give them a life. They never thought possible. At the time, it had felt like a risk. He had no idea how he was going to manage it all. But now, as he looked around, he saw the results of his decision. The boys were thriving, each of them growing in their own unique way. They had dreams, they had hope, and they had a future. He thought about his own journey. how he had come from, a place of guilt and regret, consumed by the idea that he wasn't enough. But in the process of helping these boys, he had found something he never expected: healing. They had healed him as much as he had healed them. The bond they shared was stronger than any obstacle he had faced. And now, he understood what true success meant. It wasn't about the wealth or the recognition. It was about the impact he had on their lives, the chance he had given them to start over, to rise above their pasts. He had given them a home, but in return, they had given him a new purpose. Jacob smiled softly as he watched the boys settle into their evening routine. They had made it. Despite all the hardships, despite the moments of doubt and fear, they had made it. And so had he. His heart lightened as he walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. As he leaned against the counter, the thought hit him once again. What if I hadn't done it? What if I hadn't taken that leap of faith? But he didn't dwell on the what-ifs. He couldn't. The past was behind him, and he had a responsibility to look ahead. The boys were counting on him, and he wouldn't let them down. The future was uncertain, but the love and unity they shared gave him all the strength he needed to face whatever came next. As he stood there, staring out the window at the horizon, the first stars of the evening began to appear, twinkling brightly in the sky. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had given his all to them, and now they were ready to thrive on their own. They were ready to face the world and conquer whatever challenges lay ahead. And Jacob knew, deep down, that they would succeed. The sound of the boys' laughter echoed in the background, and Jacob turned to see them running toward him. They were full of energy, full of life, full of hope. He felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude in his chest. This was what he had worked for, what he had sacrificed everything for. It was all worth it. The
Every
cold
moment
rain
of doubt,
poured relentlessly,
every tear
drenching
shed,
everything
every
in its
sleepless
path.
night.
In the heart of the city,
had all
a man
led to
lay
this.
in a sterile hospital bed.
As the boys
his
gathered
breath
around
shallow,
him,
his
he
eyes
knelt
filled
down to
with
their level,
unspeakable sorrow.
looking each of them in
James
the eyes.
Weston, a
"You
self-made
guys
millionaire,
are my family,"
had everything,
he said.
Most people would
His
dream
voice
of
filled with
wealth,
emotion.
success, power.
"I will always
but
be
nothing
here for
that
you,
could fill the gaping
no matter
hole
what
in
happens.
his heart.
We're in this
His
together."
wealth had never been able to give him
The boys
one
smiled
thing
back
he
at
longed
him,
for.
their faces
a
full of
family.
love and trust.
And now, with days
They had
left
come
to live,
so far,
his heart carried,
and Jacob knew
a
they
burden
would
greater
continue
than
to
any
rise.
business deal
He
or
was no
luxury
longer just
possession.
their guardian.
The thought of dying
He was their
alone,
mentor,
with
their
no one to
protector,
carry on
their
his
father
legacy,
figure,
haunted him
and
relentlessly.
they were his future.
It wasn't just the money that
The
troubled
journey
him.
wasn't over.
It was the lives
challenges
of the
were
forgotten
far from
children who
finished.
roamed the streets of the
But
city.
for the first time in a
unseen,
long while,
unloved,
Jacob knew that
James had.
whatever came next,
spent his
they
life
would
building
face
an
it
empire,
together.
yet he'd never
They were
truly
strong.
found peace.
They were a
his
family,
mind raced
and
as
nothing
his life
could tear
flashed
them
before
apart.
him. His parents,
With a heart full of hope
gone.
and a future that
His
was
friends,
brighter than ever,
few.
Jacob stood up,
The world,
ready to face the
indifferent.
world,
knowing
then,
that in his
he had
last
already won.
moments, a
the
sudden
real
clarity
treasure
struck
wasn't the
him like a
mansion
bolt
or
of
the
lightning.
fortune. It
What
was
if
the
he could
love
do
they
something?
shared,
The
something that
lives
would
they had
not only
transformed,
bring meaning to
and the
his life,
futures
but
they
could
had
change the
created.
lives of others
This was
forever.
just the beginning.
And
What if he
Jacob
could
was
offer
ready
these
for whatever
homeless
came
boys,
next?
These innocent